I'm Stephanie Soderstrom. I am the supervisor for short-term mission and North American partnerships with RCA Global Mission, and I am really excited to get to introduce you to these next two missionaries who are friends of mine now as we've worked together. And I'm really happy to introduce you to Doug McClintock and Gretchen Skoontanis. They have both served in Europe. Doug started working with the European Church Planting Partnership in 2008, and for the last 5 years, he and his wife Diane have lived in Hungary, helping to support European church planters in their work starting and growing churches throughout Europe. Gretchen and her husband Phil lived in Hanover, Germany for the last 10 years and just came back to the US recently. Gretchen, 9 years ago, started the Reformed English Language International Service in Hanover, also known as Relish. Gretchen and Doug have both been working with the church in Europe for many years, and I'm excited to hear from them about how international churches and the church in Europe have been changing and growing over the past year. So let's clap our hands and welcome Doug and Gretchen.
Well, hi, Gretchen.
Hi, Doug.
Isn't it weird being in America?
It really, really is.
In the United States of America.
Yes,
It's a little weird.
yes.
I want to confirm that there are Canadians here for everyone. Yeah. Oh, the international church has gone from being something that serviced certain people over the years to a missional force throughout the planet. There are over 1,000 English-speaking international churches in 400 cities throughout the world. And some of those are part of our mission and have been part of our mission for a long, long time. I had the privilege before I ended up in Hungary with my partner, with my wife Diane. We served as in an interim position in Bahrain, and we had a richly international English-speaking congregation that's now pastored by Blaine Newhouse. One time we had a sort of off-season new members class in which we welcomed people from 11 countries.
It's amazing.
And so we talk about this this English-speaking international church as a real missionary opportunity. Gretchen started one such church in Hanover, Germany. And I just want you to just say a word about what led to that and the early days of Relish and really what the acronym Relish means.
Yeah, thanks. In 2014, my husband Phil took a job with the World Communion of Reformed Churches when they moved their headquarters from Geneva, Switzerland, up to Hanover. And our family knew it was a call from God, and we went in faith, curious to see what the adventure would bring to us. And about a year into living in Hanover, I was really struggling because our family hadn't found a worshiping community where we felt home. And I was wrestling with that because our kids were young. Our daughter Emmy was 4, our son John was 8. And I didn't want them to suffer for the choices that their parents made without them having much input other than, okay, off we go. So I talked with our German friend, Paul Oppenheim, and I said, I'm really having a hard time. I feel like we're struggling because we don't have a worshiping home that we feel a part of, and I want my kids raised in the faith, raised with the stories that I grew up with. What can we do about that? And Paul said, well, an English language worship service was always part of the idea when the WCRC moved up to Hanover, so let's do it. Like, okay, I guess it just took me speaking up to get things going. But then on Pentecost Sunday in 2015, our first worship service of this English language international service was launched. And as we were preparing for that worship service, we had everything else in place. And Paul said, well, we need someone to preach on that first Sunday. And I said, well, I trained as a pastor. I can volunteer to do the first shift, in essence. And after the worship service that Sunday in 2015, Paul came to me and said, well, I guess we found our pastor. Well, I guess so. And I am with Eddie on this. I'm so grateful for young people being here, because when I was 17 years old, I received that passage from Matthew 28 that our first speaker talked about as a personal call on my life to go out into the nations, baptizing and teaching. And over the course of our time in the congregation of Relish, when I would look out, I was just gobsmacked at what God's promise meant for me, that my congregation literally came from all the nations. I had people from South Korea, India, Canada, Ireland, Mozambique, Namibia, all were part of our congregation, and I was thrilled to see how God placed a call on my life and fulfilled it in ways I could have never have imagined.
That's amazing. And anyone that's familiar with how church planting actually works, that's a very formal process for selecting a pastor.
Yes.
Yeah. I think thinking over these years in which you've pastored this congregation, can you tell us about a time when a person who was very far from their home was a part of your congregation, and how Relish impacted them?
I'd love to tell you a story, Doug, and as others listen in, story of two sets of people. This first picture, you'll see Steffi, the bride in this photograph. At the time when Steffi joined the Relish community, she was a PhD student studying chemistry at Leibniz University. And she came from the Church of South India. And so when she discovered the Relish community, she felt like she came home, because she could worship in English and could be in a context where she felt very familiar. Over the years that I pastored and lived a journey of faith with Steffi, I was able to walk alongside her as she wrestled with some big questions. For those of you who know the Indian context at all, Steffi had quite an interesting journey with her parents around who she would marry. And she had tense Zoom calls with her mom and dad about how she would go through the process of finding someone to marry. And she often had to come to me afterwards and say, Pastor G, I don't know how I'm going to stay in a good, healthy relationships with my parents as we journey this life together, because I don't agree with what they want for me. Eventually, she found Jubin, and Jubin is here in this photograph. And a year and a half ago, she and Jubin got married. Jubin is also a Christian and happened to come from a village neighboring the village of Steffi. And they were reacquainted when she was there over a Christmas break one year. And she came home and said, Gee, God has answered my prayers. And I could see the beauty of how, even though she was far from her parents, far from home, she was able to trust God, be in a community who would pray with her for God's blessing, and to see the fruition of that was a beautiful thing.
Tell us another story.
Here are the Maderos. The Maderos are from Texas. The Maderos lived a typical expat life, every 2 to 3 years moving to a different country because Paul worked in the oil industry. You can see Germany had a much longer go with safety protocols around during the COVID pandemic. We're here in 2021, Christmas Eve. When the Madero family gathered with the Relish community, being part because they are native English speakers, Kimberly, the mom, came to me and said, "I finally found a church where I can breathe." In all of the locations where they had been just before moving to Hanover, they were in Kuala Lumpur, they'd been in the Middle East, came to Germany, and she said, "I feel so at home, will you please baptize my kids?" And so on Christmas Eve 2021, I had the opportunity to baptize the 3 kids of the Madero family because they finally found a place where they felt home. And Kimberly and I would often get together for lunch, and I would pray with her and over her as she struggled to be a mom of 3 kids far from her family in Texas. And for her, having a worshiping community in her mother tongue was a life-giving thread for her while she was far away from her home of origin.
Wow, that's great. Let's talk about what's interesting is that there are, not every international church is a mission outpost. Some of them are very closed communities, and but those that have the missional DNA within them often find themselves impacting not just expats or international students or people that are from far away that are native English speakers, but they also find themselves impacting people from the local area. So in Hanover, tell us about some impact in the German context, in the local context.
I would like to introduce you to my very good friend Vivica Bree, who is pictured here. Here's the official solemn, the picture you want to send to your mom. On the left side of the picture in blue is Vivica. Vivica is a child of the Reformiert Kirche in Hanover. She grew up in the congregation, did confirmation as a good German would do. They're very still strongly immersed in the confirmation process. But after turning about 16 or 17, Vivica left the church and did not pursue a life of faith in any capacity, really, other than, of course, the Christmas Eve service every year and perhaps, if lucky, an Easter service. For Vivica, it's a very common situation in Germany, and I think across Europe, where young people are raised in the church, but then when they reach teenage or young adulthood, they don't have any connection to the church anymore. But something was bothering Vivica. She was longing for something, and she couldn't figure out what it was. Through our friendship that became solid and strengthened through our interaction with one another at the international school, Vivica's son and my son John were in the same class together at the international school. She finally figured out that I was a pastor and said, gee, can I join you for worship sometime? I said, of course. And like anyone visiting a new community, she sat in the very back row and just let things settle in over a time. And then one Sunday she came with her daughter, Philippa. Then 2 months later she came with her mom, Petra. Then a couple months after that she came with her auntie. And slowly but surely, Vivica started bringing more and more people along with her to church. And in November, 2 or 3 years ago now, she came up to me, stood behind me, and said, "Gee, you're the reason why I have a relationship with God again." And I said, "Vivica, it's actually the Holy Spirit is why you have a relationship with God again." But she came to feel so comfortable, so welcomed in an environment where she could understand the gospel in simple and heartfelt ways that she returned to a life of faith again, which is what brings us to these next photographs, the fun ones. This is her daughter, Philippa. Just felt so comfortable. And for those who have been to Hanover, you will have known and met Philippa. But it brings us to feeling like this. We had a lot of fun with one another. You'll see Viveka's mom, Petra, sort of in the back with the white hair, became so much a pillar of our Relish community and was so welcoming to all of the other native German speakers who came to be part of our community, that it has an impact even for those who are native Germans in this context. But I think international churches have a way of bringing native people back to a life of faith who have drifted away from a relationship with God and are invited to take up that path of following Christ once again.
You know, Europe is a place with many, many resources, much like North America, and we know that many people are trying to get to Europe. They're trying to get to North America. They're trying to get to places of refuge, often, you know, rejected or marginalized in those places. But the church can often be, and international churches can often be a resource, a place of relationship for people that are coming toward these more resourced areas. And you have a really interesting story that crosses paths with Holland, Michigan, and Hanover, Germany, and Sofia, Bulgaria, and all the way to Afghanistan. And tell us a little bit about that.
It is truly a story of all of these crossroads meeting up, and I love our image of the tree with the roots and the branches because those roots cross lines with one another. And I would like to tell you a story about being at the right place and the right time, and as my mom always says, we're blessed to be a blessing. In February of 2022, my husband Phil gets a phone call from a member of Third Reformed Church where he grew up. And the person said, "Phil, you used to live in Bulgaria, right?" Phil said, "Yes." In the early 1990s, Phil worked in Bulgaria doing training for the democratic process after communism fell in that country and lived there for 2 years. And this member of Third Reformed Church said, "We might need your help. I'll call you back." Okay. It turns out that when the United States pulled out of Afghanistan, those people who had been interpreters or guards that worked closely with the United States were then in danger. Ahmadzai's family left in a moment's notice. Ahmadzai got separated from his family on the way to the airport and got lost. He couldn't get through the barricades to join his family on their flight to the United States. This family was relocated to West Michigan, worked with Third Reformed to be settled in Holland, and when they finally had a chance to share their story, the mom said, "We don't know where our son is. We haven't heard from him. We don't know where he is." What happened is Ahmadzai started walking, and he started walking towards Europe. He hitched a ride. He was scooped up by smugglers and planted in a basement for about a week, managed to escape, and got to the border of Bulgaria. He walked with a couple of other Afghanis through the snow, through a forest in order to be scooped up by Border Patrol and put in jail, and then moved from jail to a refugee center in Sofia in Bulgaria. And that's where we pick up the story. So the family of Third Reformed finally heard from Ahmadzai, who managed to get his story out. And the mom knew that he was in this refugee center, but he didn't have any documentation. Nobody knew who he was. He didn't speak any English, no other language other than Afghani. And so Phil was asked to take a trip to Sofia and see if you can get Ahmadzai into the process of being relocated back to West Michigan. And so Phil went. But Phil went with an offering from Relish to buy new clothes for Ahmadzai, to give him clean, fresh underwear and socks. Phil even purchased him The Wizard of Oz, a primer because it had English words to learn in the back of the book, with a strong link to Holland, Michigan, his upcoming new home. Phil took along an offering, especially from the Madero family, who knew what it was like to have kids in danger and that heart of a mom to make sure her kids are safe. So Phil went. He met with a lawyer. He met with the refugee center. He met Ahmadzai. You see that picture of them smiling. That's just after Phil bought him clean underwear. He had a chance to prepare him for his move, which a year later finally came to fruition. Ahmadzai is now a Holland High School graduate. And this is a story of the ways that the international churches, because of their unique locations around the world, can be a blessing to those who are in need or are in danger. And it is the missional heart, not only of the leaders of those congregations, but of the people that make up those worshiping communities that are a blessing to others. Ahmadzai's family are Muslim, and Phil went with not any intention to try to convert him, but simply to help him. And that made all the difference in the world.
Thank you. So, Paul says that we are ambassadors for Christ. And it seems to me that many of these churches that we've talked about, many international churches, and in fact, all of our churches, are embassies for the kingdom of God in the midst of things like war and turmoil and being far from home and secularization and drifting away from your faith. And places like Relish serve as those embassies. What are some things that we can do as fellow ambassadors in the RCA, in congregations associated with RCA Global Mission? How can we support and participate in this kind of work?
I have one last photograph for you, and this is the, I didn't get to tell you the story about Mavi. Mavi is in the middle. I call him Bus, my bonus Ukrainian son.
Bus.
Yes. If you catch me, I would be happy to talk to you about Mavi, who came to live with us during when Russia invaded Ukraine. That's a story for another day. Relish turned 9 this year. And one of the things that I always like to say to the Relish community is, yes, Relish, everyone's like, oh, is it something you put on a hot dog? Like, well, yes, that's one interpretation of the word relish. But relish also means to take delight in. And I would always tell the congregation, can you imagine that God takes delight in you? And how does that shape your heart for worship if you know that when God looks at you, God is delighted? And I think one of the things that churches and the RCA can do is, of course, pray for those pastors who are serving churches around the world, because it's tiring. It's hard to be far from home yourself. It's hard to make sure you're being understood in the best way when there are 17 different languages that are spoken as mother tongues in your congregation. It's tiring to try and start again every 2 or 3 years when core families leave your community because they're on to the next location. So pray for those leaders around the world, but also know that you're welcomed around the world as well. It is so refreshing to enter a place of worship where people welcome you because they know what it's like to be far from home themselves. The International Church is a unique outpouring of God's vision for the nations to be around the throne in the last days. We have a foretaste of what heaven will be like. Go, see, visit, experience for yourself what life is like when you worship with the nations. So pray, go, and of course support. Jeff and Chelsea Lampin are now the pastors of Relish, living in Hanover with their 3 kids. The kids just started in German primary school. They just finished their second week, or will finish their second week on Friday. So pray for them, but also support them. They're in an amazing community where people have a new and renewed life of faith with God because of the work that's being done in the Relish community, in the city of Hanover, in the country of Germany, on the continent of Europe.
Thank you. Thank you very much. In our last 20 seconds, I also want to give another call to action. If you are looking for a unique pastoral responsibility, the International Student Church of Debrecen is looking for someone to plant it. And we are ready to go. Everything's in place. All you need to do is talk with me, and you can be on a plane in a couple of months, couple of years, and be impacting international students from all over the world in one of the most beautiful cities in Europe.
And it just takes you saying yes to the Holy Spirit. When I said yes as a teenager, a young adult, I never could imagine where God would take me, and in essence, our family as well. And it is the most amazing adventure you could ever have in your life, is simply by saying yes to God. And maybe that yes means Hungary for you.
So thanks for sitting in on our conversation, and we're very excited for your attention. Thank you very much.